Okay, so last weekend, my brother-in-law flew here to Los Angeles from Sacramento, so not too far, but it was for $30.
Damn.
Round trip.
Scored.
Right?
Wow.
Which is crazy because I had just visited them the week prior, but I paid the equivalent of a $500 flight.
Girl.
I used miles. I know.
Girl.
I know. But today we are talking about budget airlines.
Are they worth it? Let's talk about it.
Welcome to Net with Lizzy and Lissa, where we analyze hidden costs and empower you to make your own damn decisions in life. Each episode covers a different facet of life, and at the end of each episode, we each give our takes on whether we think something is net positive or net negative.
I'm Lizzy, a strategist and consultant with almost 20 years of experience in finance and investing.
And I'm Lissa, a personal finance expert and an accredited financial counselor. We're best friends who talk about money
and everything else.
Are budget airlines worth it?
First up, running the numbers on budget airlines.
According to Capital Technology University, the global low-cost airline market is projected to reach $440 billion by 2030.
Damn.
That's a huge industry.
Yeah. According to Investopedia, the average price of a domestic round-trip ticket in the U.S. fell from $647 in 1990 to $420 in 2019 when adjusted for inflation, and I would imagine has fallen even more since then in the past 5 years.
Yeah, so over a 30-year span, prices are dropping. The average is
significantly
dropping because of these budget airlines, probably. Right?
Yep.
So airlines also went from filling about 54% of seats in 1975 to using 85% of their seating capacity in 2019.
Interesting. So you think people are flying more?
Or like
it's more affordable?
Yeah, or they're messing with the prices to like fill up those seats.
Gotcha.
And there are a lot of people, we'll get into it, who like to fly last minute.
Yeah, like technology, it's not booked, so I'm going to put it real cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. All right. Southwest, a major budget airline, had a 16.9% share of the domestic U.S. air travel market in the past 12 months. And that's just behind Delta's 17.2% and American Airlines' 17.5%. So just barely behind two major carriers that are not budget airlines.
Yeah. Well, we know there is more to life than numbers, so let's talk about it. Budget airlines. Are budget airlines worth it? All right.
I know you got a lot to say, Lisa.
No, I have a lot to say, but look, this episode is not going to be about me because besides Southwest, which I'll get into later, I don't think there's any other budget airline I've flown on.
Ever?
That I can think of, unless, well, let's define it.
Okay.
What counts as budget airline?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know like the official definition. I know I was reading, and I didn't read very carefully, that it had to do with deregulation that happened in the airline industry, which is how these began to emerge. I don't know exactly what that was and why, because I didn't read it, y'all. But I think they tend to offer fewer features that are like non-essential, and because of that can maybe are operationally lighter and more efficient, and then because of that can offer lower prices, or they're just not charging as much for their brand, and it's just like a strategic decision price-wise. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But then I think that has also like shifted the way tickets work in general, where you're now getting like basic fares and stuff like that, which is like, in my opinion, like the Spirit Airlines effect of, to my knowledge in the US, they were the first to really do it that way. And then that shifted the whole industry.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, without having an actual legit definition of budget airline, when we're in the United States, what come to mind for me is Spirit and Frontier,
JetBlue, Southwest.
And then now that you mentioned Southwest, I'm like, okay, that's right. When I was like broke, that was my go-to airline to fly home.
Yeah.
In California, it's very easy to get flights on Southwest anywhere you need to go.
For sure. Yeah. I thinking about it now, there's definitely like a brand difference when you think about like Delta or American, in terms of like a perceived experience. But at the same time, when I try to break that down, I don't know how much of that is real, or it's perceived. And so that's kind of an interesting thing with these budget airlines. So you haven't flown on any of them besides Southwest?
Well, the ones you've mentioned, I don't think I've flown on. Is JetBlue a budget airline?
It is, yeah.
So I've not flown JetBlue or Spirit or Frontier. And then even in like Europe, I think
Ryanair, Click
I think
Air.
I've avoided
Okay.
them in some way.
Yeah. Those were my first experiences with budget airlines. I lived abroad when I was 19. And the cheapest flight I have ever purchased in my life was €9.
€9 all in. That's
all
with
in. €9 one way, not round trip. I think it was one way. It was like, I want to go on a trip. I'm broke. I think it was my trip to Malta. I can't remember for sure. From Barcelona to Malta.
Okay.
Yeah. But we had a couple of those. Like the very first month I was there, I got really homesick, and my friend was like, "Let's go somewhere this weekend." We're broke, right? And so it was like, the cheapest place to go was Bratislava. So we went to Slovakia.
I was about to say, where is that?
Yeah, that's the capital of Slovakia.
Okay.
So we went there for the weekend, and then we like took a train to Vienna, which was really cool. But the entire trip strategy was like, what is the cheapest place we can go to on Friday?
Do you remember the experience of the flight?
Yeah, absolutely. I will never forget it because, I flew these airlines many times. And in Barcelona at the time, this has probably changed now, but like many of them flew out of a different airport, not BCN. It was the Girona airport, which is like very inconvenient to get to. And so it was like an hour bus or train or whatever to that airport. Smaller for sure. And then in general, like the luggage situation is different in Europe. Like they're a lot stricter on your carry-on size. And I remember one of the flights, I don't think it was that very first one. I think it was with our friend Skylar when he came to visit me.
Oh, wow.
The homie from way back when.
Yeah.
I was overweight. And so I like didn't know what to do. And so I just took out
luggage.
my baggage. My luggage was overweight.
I was like, Liz, don't talk about yourself like that. Okay.
My luggage was overweight. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna just put on a whole bunch of clothes right now. And that's what I did to like avoid the baggage fees, because it was like €100 or something. And that's the thing with a lot of these low cost carriers is the fare is really low, but the fees are really, really high. And to some extent they trick you into it or like kind of exploit you. They're not super transparent about that. And so if you're not aware, you're going to end up paying more. So I had a friend, the very first time I ever heard of Spirit, they were flying Spirit from, I think, DC to Vegas.
Okay.
Didn't know anything about it and got to the airport, like didn't realize that it didn't include not even check bags, but like a carry-on.
Yeah.
It just had a personal item. And then the fee for a carry-on when you're at the airport is like way, way higher than if you book it in advance.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being like several $100s for their luggage that they just didn't know.
So that's no longer a budget flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that is a thing with some of them.
Yeah.
Like Think Spirit in particular and some of the European ones where it's budget if you do it a certain way.
Yeah.
But like JetBlue is not like that, for example.
Well, that's why, so I brought this travel bag. This I don't carry just like loosely. I use this little toiletry bag in my luggage.
Yeah.
But how I picture in my head flying on a budget airline is if you really want that $20, $30 flight, that's all you can bring.
I think about that too. Like, who's the person that only brings a personal item? And then it's like maybe like an overnight bag or business traveler?
Well, my brother-in-law, he literally was in Los Angeles for less than 24 hours. He came for a festival. There was a NoFX concert festival that he went to by himself. So he just flew here. He stayed at our place, so he didn't have to pay accommodations. But he came with a very small backpack, and
that was it.
And he needed a clear bag because it was like a festival.
Yeah.
That's all he came with. Like
that blows my mind.
Yeah.
I got too much stuff.
I know. And then the other thing I was thinking in travel is I think I could probably swing a 1-nighter or 2-night trip with very little. The only things that I would really need to bring are my contact lenses, because I can't get that anywhere else, and my night guard that I sleep with. Other than that, I'm like, all right, I could fly with almost nothing, hang out for a day or two somewhere, like, you know, if I have a hotel, shower.
Yeah, I could do that too.
Yeah.
Like I have a bag
clothes.
that I bring. It's actually over there that I bring as like my personal item. And I'm like, I can fit a lot of stuff in there. Like that I would need. Like my toiletry bag, some clothes, medication, that kind of stuff.
But then that brings me to, then at what point is that just like so inconvenient to enjoy what you're actually traveling for?
And I think, so to me, there's an association with budget airlines of it is a negative experience, right? Like the seats are so much smaller. The legroom is so much worse. They don't have TV screens or whatever. And I actually think that varies. I have flown Spirit before, but not in a really long time.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what's the last budget airline you've flown on?
JetBlue, and recently, like within the last year.
Okay.
And it's actually really loved JetBlue. They have unlimited snacks. You can get up and get as many snacks as you want from the back, and they got all different kinds of snacks. So you know me, like that's the way to my heart. And they actually have like a lot of really convenient routes from smaller airports, like from Burbank.
Oh,
so I like JetBlue a lot. I haven't had a
that's why in my head, brand-wise, I didn't associate them with budget airline, even though I had heard that it is pretty affordable.
So I think some of them, there's like bare bones, right? Where it's like, you know what this is. Do you want to come or not?
Yeah.
And then I think some, it's like just a strategic positioning for someone that maybe wants a different experience, or it's just a pricing function, right? Like they're not incorporating so much of a profit margin because their long-term strategy is different or something like that. I guess.
So that's the thing. I think because I've not flown budget airlines, definitely none in the last 5 years, 10 years. I don't really know what it's like except what I see on like TikTok and Instagram when I see the worst, like when people are fighting on these flights.
For sure.
Like, I think I have a bad view of what it actually is.
I've flown, I'm not a Southwest person, particularly because like the same reason a lot of people love it, which is you choose your own seat when you board.
When you get on. So okay, that's still
a thing. So like you check in and that gives you a slot.
Right.
And then it's like first come, first serve for seating. I don't like that. I want my assigned seat.
Yeah.
And so I don't really enjoy that. I've flown it often because sometimes it's a good route or whatever.
I used to have a Southwest credit card, and that was my go-to airline.
Yeah.
And because I flew so much, I don't even know what it's called anymore. That they don't have a real rewards program, but they have the status thing where you're like always in the A1 through 15. Yeah. I always had that. So I always never had that issue. It was like, okay, I get to board first, regardless of the first anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just like always forget.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't like check in the minute I need to check in. So I get like a shitty spot and I'm in the middle and I'm like, this is stupid. If I just use a different airline, I could get a window seat like I want. But that's not, a lot of people love Southwest. Like they have built a certain brand and experience that they're known for that is differentiated. And so a lot of people love it and swear by it and only fly with them. And I think JetBlue is trying to do something similar. It's funny though you say that. It's something you said, like when I have flown budget airlines recently, I've boarded and looked around like, who are y'all?
Is there going to be some trouble on this flight?
Not even trouble, but just like the clientele feels different, right? And some of that is like, I don't think they have first class or business class. Yeah. Not that I'm flying that regularly, but I don't know. There's just something to it, right? Like you get different people that are, bargain hunting, myself included sometimes,
But still then, so for your recent JetBlue experience and in the past you flew that €9 flight to Slovakia, there was nothing inherently like wrong with the flight, right? Like
I would say
were the flight attendants more mean?
No, not at all. I think in my experience, and maybe others have had different experiences, there is a certain level of being less convenient, less comfortable. And those are things that are like a little hard to quantify. I flew a lot of budget airlines in Europe, like many. So it was just this feeling of like, there's no flexibility. You're either like in this very rigid box or you're off this damn flight. And they were small and, you know, whatever. I think Spirit, everyone says is like, oh, it's so cramped. I flew the longest Spirit flight I took, I think, was to Chicago. I don't really remember it being particularly like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that also may be just the way I experience flights. Like, I don't watch in-flight entertainment, really. I'm like, I can sleep anywhere.
Yeah. Well, so that brings me to a interesting story from my early days in my career. So story time.
Story time.
Story time. There was a time when I was an assistant, and so I supported 2 executives. And as part of my job, I had to book their travel, everything, their flights, their accommodations, their car service. And one of the first times, and this was like in my early 20s, when I had flown overseas like once or twice. I didn't really know much about, you know, international landscape. So anyway, I had to book this like multi destination flight in Europe because there was like an event, a conference, and whatever. And we have these caps that we have to stick to when we book flights, because we can't spend like $20,000 on a flight. There's a budget tied to it. So anyway, I booked this itinerary, and my boss, one of my bosses, he was the type to just trust me, and like he wouldn't even look at the itinerary day of. He has all his boarding passes. He's ready to go. But one of those connecting flights, and I could tell you exactly why I booked Ryanair for one of these shorter legs, and I know why I did that. I did that because he wanted to fly into a very specific airport to see family. Yeah. On a work trip, so it was still covered. But the only airline that flew that route was the budget airline. Right. So that's why I didn't even bother asking him. I didn't, whatever. Yeah. So anyway, he gets there. He gets to the airport, and like, mind you, this is like a 8-hour time difference or whatever. And so I'm like, cool, my boss is traveling. I don't got to worry about it. But no, he calls me and he's like, do not ever book this airline again. And I'm like, oh, is it like, what's wrong with it? Like, and then he was just like, just don't. And then I had to like ask around later on to just find out, like, it's, you know, based on what you describe, I don't think there was anything wrong that happened on it or to him. I just think it's, the experience is just not as great. It's not as comfortable. And especially for someone who's an exec who's used to flying with more space and convenience and better, I don't know, nicer planes. That was what it was. Yeah. And so how would I know that? I was 23, 24 years old, and now I know. And now even I associate those things that are probably not always accurate with what a budget airline is.
That's funny.
Right? I was like,
girl.
Oh man, don't fire me.
I feel for you. I can imagine that.
Yeah, and I love him to death. I still keep in contact with him. He wasn't being an asshole to me. It was just like a, hey, for future reference, do not do this again, please. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think when I first started traveling, like I said, it was like by any means necessary, right? Like, travel or don't travel. So whatever option I have. For fun? For fun, yeah. And that was like really started when I was in Europe. And so it was like, I have limited income, but everything is so close. So like, how can I maximize this? Yeah. And that was just kind of normalized there too. But even for like years after that, I had this mindset, and not just specific to travel, of like, it was like a commodity. I viewed it as like, it didn't make any sense to me to pay $200 more for the same underlying thing. I couldn't justify that in my head.
To get me from point A to point B in 2 hours or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's taken a long time to get out of that. It is hard though, because to some extent I can't quantify exactly what is different about the experience, other than something like having a loyalty program, you know, and wanting to get miles on a specific airline. But yeah, it's tricky. And, you know, I'm not opposed to it. Like I said, I've traveled JetBlue in the past year, and maybe Southwest also. It's more about like what is the most convenient time and all of that stuff. But like I don't look at Spirit.
Yeah. But then I guess are these videos that we see on TikTok of like, you know, I don't know. I can't even, there's so many, like there's fights, there's people yelling on them. There's people, right? Is that just outliers because people post it and they're, or is it more likely to happen on a budget airline flight?
It's interesting, right? It's kind of funny to think about like airlines in the back in the day, flying was like a really formal experience, right? Like you would dress in your Sunday best, you know, and it was like very respectable and dignified. And now everyone's in like their sweatpants and whatever. And so like, I do think there is something psychologically to like paying more for something and having a higher standard for yourself and others. Whereas like if something is cheap, you don't value it as much and maybe on some level don't behave the same way. Or it attracts different people, but that's hard because I don't want to say that people with poverty or with less money are like less civilized. Like that's bullshit. That's not true.
But it's more the environment, like you said, like, and what you attribute to it.
Yeah. And I could imagine, I haven't personally experienced that, but I can imagine that their employees are getting paid less or whatever. They just don't care as much. Like, maybe. Or there are fewer people. They're not as invested in the service. Like, that's not part of the culture. I'm not sure.
So do you think that we said that there was an increase in seats being filled on flights. Do you think that like every seat is filled on budget airline flights more so than others because they're so cheap? Like they'll fill them up?
Oh, interesting. I'm trying to think from like my own experiences. I feel like I don't know that I can think of a difference. I fly a lot. You fly a lot too.
What's the chance that you could, get a budget airline $30 round trip flight and like have the whole row to yourself?
I feel like almost every single time I travel, I have a seat open next to me. But part of that is because I book one of the last rows in the window seat.
Oh.
And I almost always, if I'm able, book it when there's no one else booked in that seat. And so, like almost every flight, I have someone.
So you have extra space.
I have extra room.
So you don't need to pay for your extra space.
Exactly. Okay. I do it on purpose. Because I'm like, what does 5 minutes getting in or out matter to me? I'd rather just sit in the back and have room, right? So I don't know. It's hard for me to think about it, whether that's been different on a budget airline or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I wish I had more to say. Maybe before we did this episode, I should have flown one.
Well, I guess my question is like, why don't you? What is your perception around budget airlines, or like why that is not a thing you consider?
Yeah. Well, I will say that, okay, when I used to fly Southwest all the time, it was primarily based on cost. That's when I was making less in my career. And it just felt the most convenient to get the routes I needed at least $100 or $200 less than flying Delta, United, or American. So to me, that's when I used to use Southwest. Then there came a time where I was getting a lot of my flights expensed through my job.
Yeah.
And not only that, but at my job, they had these perks where you could immediately get like silver status on one of these airlines.
Got it.
And so I just chose a couple, created accounts, and then slowly started booking those instead of Southwest.
Got it.
Yeah. And then it was this natural progression to then I decided, all right, I'm going to learn to have frequent flyer miles and figure out the reward system. And so in the last 3 years or so, I've been completely with Delta.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's less my fear of like rowdiness it's not like a budget airline flight has a higher likelihood of like crashing than a non, right? So it's not like a fear or anything like that. But I think because I've partially associated, higher cost with higher quality, which could be wrong. And because I just naturally progressed into flying upper class with a singular airline, that's why I just never go back. Like if I'm going to fly somewhere, I'll first and foremost look at my airline for flights.
Interesting.
And then if I had to be somewhere, like let's say for a conference and there was no flights on Delta, like my next would be like American because I also have miles there.
Yeah.
And then so I wouldn't even go down the list. I always find a flight that I need. Yeah. It would take me having no other option, no other route to get on an airline that I don't usually fly.
So it's not a function of price.
Oh, because then...
Is there a line, right? Like,
yeah.
Is there a point... Let's say something that you had expected to spend $300 on looks like it's going to be $500 on Delta or American.
I'll pay more.
Interesting. Okay.
Which is silly on the rewards front, right? Like, because like if I'm optimizing my airlines so I can get frequent flyer miles and status and access to these things, then it's like I'm just paying it. It's baked into my price. But I will say that on the status side, if you reach certain status because you spent enough money with an airline or flown enough flights with an airline, I feel like it's pretty much priceless. Like I get like first class upgrades pretty often domestically, and then I get miles to fly. I could fly free if I wanted to Europe, but because I like flying upper class, I have to accumulate way more miles.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say for me, but that was like a life transition to get to this point of like, I value my airline status, my preferred airline. It's familiar to me. It's comfortable to me because I do get upgrades and things like that. I do like the planes. I love the service, and all those things to me are worth that extra $100 or whatever.
For sure,
amount.
Yeah. I think my experience now is maybe somewhere in the middle, where if I'm like booking a flight, like I'm going to New York in a few weeks. We're going to New York in a few weeks.
So I'll see you there.
Yeah, I'm gonna book a flight. I'll prioritize American because for better or worse, that's where I've like stuck in, and I think I made the wrong call, but I'm like, anyway.
You're already bought in.
I'm already bought in.
And they have a lot of partner
it's just
airlines.
so high to get status.
Oh, right. It is tough.
I'm like, what am I doing? Why did I do this? I might switch it up. We'll talk.
Quick side thing is, it's harder to get status on certain airlines, but I think that the perks you actually get are way better because like on Delta, like so many people get access to the lounges. It's just like these lounges are so crowded all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair point. We'll discuss this.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so I will look and prioritize American. And I have my sequence, right, that I'll go through. But it probably more than anything, it's a function of the time of the flights in terms of what is going to be like most convenient and easy for me lifestyle-wise. That's like my number one factor. And if there's not a convenient timing on American or, a preferred airline that is a reasonable price to me, like within maybe $100 or so, I would be inclined to do a different airline. So
do you book directly with airlines on their websites?
I use Google Flights and then I go to an airline.
So in the past, I used to use like, was it Priceline?
Yeah.
And like Kayak. I used to use all these where you can just see all the different airlines in one place. And I couldn't tell you when I just moved from that. Maybe when I started going
with
on
a singular
Delta.
airline, because why would you?
Yeah, because I feel like like getting refunds on some of those services are harder and like
I still book
flights.
direct, but I use Google Flights to
look at
find
the
the flight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't want to deal even using my booking travel through my credit card.
Yeah.
God, it's inconvenient. I had to cancel a flight like a year ago, about this, and like it basically my credit is worthless. So like annoying.
So on Spirit, for people who book there, like do you think people end up there because that's where they go? Like they go to the Spirit Airlines website?
No.
Or is it shows up on like Google Flights or
I think
something?
they're price shopping. I think unless they just have been a repeat customer and they know that they're gonna want Spirit because like they just tend to go for the cheapest one.
Yeah.
I don't. I think they're price shopping. I think that's how Spirit gets a lot of people who aren't familiar with their airline and their policies, which is kind of tricky. Mm-hmm. That said, I do think Southwest people go directly to Southwest. And in fact, most of those like services didn't used to include Southwest flights. And so you had to book direct through them. Now Google Flights started picking up Southwest, but that's like pretty recent.
Yeah.
And I think JetBlue is trying to do that same thing, but I don't know that they're there yet. That's like my perception.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I think like coming back to the cost, right? There's a financial cost benefit, right? Like you potentially several $100s in savings depending on the route. But that's only if you're aware of everything that's included and like diligent about your baggage and the timing of booking things.
What are all the fees that you could potentially get on a budget airline? And this is not all of them.
Yeah,
right?
it
like,
varies.
Varies. So like, let's say a Spirit.
So there's a checked bag fee.
Yeah, and which a lot of airlines have.
Yeah, but there's also a carry-on fee, which is not typical.
Got it. So like, you
get a personal item.
Right.
If you want a carry-on, you have to pay for a carry-on. And most people don't realize that because that's atypical. And it's a sliding scale. So the earlier you book that, the cheaper it is. And if you book it at the airport, it's like $20 or $30 more.
Is that specific to using overhead space, or does that even count if you put it under the seat?
That's what they consider like your personal item.
Oh, okay.
So it's like for overhead space.
If it can fit under the seat, that's a personal item.
Exactly.
All right.
So carry-on fee, checked fee, which is pretty standard.
Picking your seat ahead of time.
Yeah, a lot of them say they just have no assigned seats.
Yeah.
And so you get the seat that you get. So if you want to have an aisle or a window or whatever, you have to pay for that. Do they give you
a beverage, like a water or a soda or a coffee?
I actually don't remember. I think so.
Okay.
But maybe not. Yeah. And a lot of them, and just other airlines in general, have switched to like, maybe they have like bare bones, like just a beverage. They don't even have like pretzels, and then you pay for snacks and stuff.
Right.
And then, I think there's kind of all manner of like premium for like early boarding and stuff like that. They might have like extra legroom seats, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. They can't charge you to like use the restroom, right?
No.
I was about to say like, I mean, that's
OD. That's OD.
Yeah, that'd be too much. Yeah. Okay.
A lot of it though relates to like the baggage.
Right.
And I think that's the main one that's differentiated is charging for a carry-on.
Yeah. So to me, I think there's definitely a case to fly budget airlines if you love to travel, especially like the closer the destination, right? If you just want to go
I agree.
a state or two nearby because you want to have a weekend that's free and you want to hang out, and that means you only have to be on a flight for like an hour to 2 hours.
I agree.
Then you can kind of suck it up, and if you have less space, less legroom, whatever. But the longer the flight, then it's like the trade-offs become more costly.
For sure, yeah. And I actually think that's part of the strategy for a lot of budget airlines. Like, kind of like I mentioned, JetBlue flies out of Burbank, which is a smaller local airport, which is really convenient for me where I live. Mm-hmm. And it's just a simple, easy airport. And easy to get in and out of, not a lot of traffic. A lot of lower cost airlines, I think they recognize that people are more willing to fly short routes through them. And so they will have like really consistent flights between like here in San Francisco or Vegas or stuff like that just make it really manageable, especially to smaller airports. So I think that is one of the benefits. Yeah. And you're not inconveniencing yourself for that long.
Yeah. Have you heard of these services, and I wish I knew what they were called, where you basically pay some kind of subscription or pass whereby when flights become available, and this is including international too, like outside of the U.S. or within the U.S., like last minute, they want to fill the seats.
It's like standby almost.
Yeah, you're basically on standby, and you can if you have the kind of lifestyle where you can go on a whim, you can get on cheap flights that way. I actually don't know which airlines are part of that, but have you heard of that? I'm
not familiar with that, but I've kind of like had skepticism around stuff like that.
Why?
I don't know. There's like, there's so many sites that are like, the one that comes to mind is like Scott's Cheap Flights. It's like an email thing
never heard of this.
like the cheapest flights every day.
Is it like, it's a newsletter?
It's a newsletter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I used to get it.
Yeah. So
and like,
it's
just like scanning and finding like the best deals. It might be like, I don't know, Kansas City to Fort Lauderdale.
Do they get a cut?
But it's like $40. Just probably some like affiliate something. Like I used to subscribe to that because it'd be like, oh, I could go somewhere for really cheap. And then I recognize like, that's actually not how I want to approach planning a trip.
Yeah.
It's like more inconvenient and whatever. But like there's a lot of sites like that are like, get the sneaky deal, and I just don't really trust it.
Yeah.
You know? That's like my own skepticism.
Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, it doesn't mean it's not legit. And more power to you if you have that lifestyle. It's dope.
Okay, so cost is obviously the actual financial cost. This is actually a deal here if you fly budget airlines. But
potentially, right? Unless you're not aware.
Unless you're not aware of those extra fees. But what are other costs?
I just think experience, comfort, and that can mean like a lot of different things. I think that depending on like the flight and the comfort and the experience, it can create stress for you when traveling is already stressful. It can affect your sleep if you're like really in a cramped seat. I think that it can maybe like limit your options potentially, your flight times, right? Like I think some budget airlines are like more likely to have red eyes, which is like its own conversation.
Yeah.
So like, fewer options, more inconvenience. But at the same time, if that gets you to where you want to go, is that better than not doing it at all if that's what you can afford? And that's where, I kind of landed historically.
I have a kind of stupid question.
Yeah.
And you might not know the answer, but like are there some airlines that have more like cancellations and delays than others? Or is that purely based on like air traffic control and the airports?
No, it's definitely by airline. And it depends the reason why. If it's like a plane issue, because like that was happening recently, like with United and
like how good they're
what kind of planes they have, like all of those Boeings that were on United, they were like, don't fly those. And then like screws were loose, or like, is their maintenance good or not?
This is where I'm like, is this not a federal regulation to make sure those screws are screwed tight?
Or think about like, with hundreds of thousands of flights a day, 5 minutes of lag time because your people cleaning the plane are slow, or the pilot's late, or whatever. That's like a big delay. It's operational.
Okay, so it can be by airline.
And I think that's actually is a factor. I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't know if this is real, but it's definitely perceived at the very least that the operational efficiency and like experience is worse on budget airlines. So they're less reliable, right? More likely to get pushed or have some wild shit happen or whatever. That's not necessarily safety related. It's just experience related.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Let's do it.
20 cents.
20 cents.
20 cents is the segment of the show where both Lizzy and myself, Lissa, each get 60 seconds to give our 2 cents on today's topic, which is budget airlines. We will tell you whether we think it is a net positive or a net negative. Why is it 20 cents?
Because you get the opinion of 2 dimes.
2 dimes.
2 dimes.
2 dimes.
That's us.
All right. Lizzy, you are up first. You have 60 seconds on the clock. Are budget airlines worth it?
This is an interesting one because I'm torn on like, am I answering for myself right now or in general? And so I'll do both. In general, I think they're absolutely worth it. And in my experience has been, I'd rather travel than not. And so if the only way I can travel is with a €9 flight, then hell yeah, I'm on there. And I'm going to wear all my clothes at one time to make my luggage fit, you know? I don't have to be in that place anymore where I can pay a little bit more, but it's still something I'm mindful of. And it's more about the other factors of like the experience and the timing and whatever when I'm booking it. So I'm not closed off to budget airlines, some of them. So I guess I will say net positive.
Oh, yeah. That's not where I thought that was going.
Yeah.
Okay. Net positive.
It's hard for me to say. I booked one in the past year, and it wasn't a bad experience. So sure.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. What about you, Lisa? This is kind of obvious, but
pretty obvious.
Where you at?
All right. Where I am at. It took me a long time. Like I'm in my late 30s now, and I will say that I'm a lot bougier than I used to be in my early 20s, in my early 30s, and in my 20s and younger. And I haven't forgotten where I come from, but now I can proudly like spend money on things like comfort, convenience, or whatever. So for me, the reason I've avoided budget airlines, like it's not really so much the brand and like I think I'm gonna like the plane's gonna crash or anything. I just like I have the way that I like to do it, and I'm able to. It's a privilege. So on that, because of that, like I don't have to fly budget airlines, at least for the majority of the time. So net negative for me right now at this moment in time. Who knows? If I'm ever broke later and I still need to travel, then I'm going
We'll find out.
to go on cheaper flights. Yeah, but hopefully not.
I just got to say, bougier now than you've ever been?
What?
I think it was like a roller coaster. Like you had a peak and then you settled in a little bit.
Okay.
I think you're less bougie than you have been at one point in time.
It's like the way that net worth like goes up and down, but trends
up.
But
the slope is positive. The slope is positive, but you're on a trough right now. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, but I'm a little bougie. But remember, this is what we think right now at this moment in time. Liz is net positive for budget airlines, and I'm net negative. But that doesn't mean you should base your opinions on what we think. Let us know, do you think budget airlines are worth it?
Nobody can make that decision but you, y'all. Hit us up. Let us know what you think. DM us on Instagram at NetNetPodcast or email us at hi@netnetpodcast.com. And if you want to follow us individually, here's where you can find us.
I'm at Wealth for Women of Color on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.
And I'm at live_well_Lizzy on Instagram and TikTok.
All references, statistics, and resources mentioned can be found in our show notes. This podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be constituted as financial advice. Remember to always do your own research, consult a professional as needed, and feel empowered to make your own damn decisions.